All right, hello, and welcome to our podcast on the thesis statement. This is one of those integral parts in the writing experience, especially when we are talking about essay structure. So let's go ahead and take a look at that and see what types of things go into writing an effective thesis statement. I think one way to think about the thesis is that it is the beating heart of your essay. The idea behind this metaphor is that everything needs to pretty much go in and out of your heart in terms of your blood supply to replenish that blood with oxygen and then send it back out to all parts of the body. I think the same thing holds true with an essay, that all things that you are writing, all examples you are giving, all factoids you are sharing, all commentary that you are providing, all must go to prove how your thesis statement is a valid argument. This isn't necessarily trying to show that our thesis statement is right objectively, but that it is a valid interpretation. So this thesis also stands for the argument. This is what you, as the writer, are saying. This is the point you are trying to make to enter that long-time conversation that we mentioned in previous podcasts. People have been studying these same texts for years or these issues, and we are just the latest to get involved in that conversation. And the way we're choosing to do that isn't with a picture or a movie or a poem or something like that, but in this case we are writing essays. And so the thesis represents our focal argument, what we are going to propose, what we are going to say to enter into that scholarly conversation. So as mentioned before, we're not necessarily trying to prove that our thesis statement is absolutely 100% right, meaning that it is the answer to this question that people have been debating forever. It is that our thesis is valid, is probable, is believable. We're probably not going to solve world hunger with any high school essay. We're probably not going to be the definitive answer in terms of interpreting any one piece of literature or a text or movies or anything like that. Our goal, though, is to enter into that academic conversation and put forth our ideas through our thesis statement. And so we are trying to argue that our point of view, our thesis, is reasonable, is valid, and is believable. So once we show exactly what elements belong in a thesis statement, we want to be able to judge them against some sort of standard and some sort of rubric for the quality of our thesis statement. And so one acronym we like to use is SOAP. And this is different from soapstone that we've talked about earlier in the class. But SOAP in this case is the idea that our thesis should be specific and sharp, should be original, should be arguable, and it should be somewhat predictive. So first off, a thesis statement should state your topic. This should be a very specific statement of what you're going to write about, and it should tell the reader exactly what this is going to focus on. At the same time, that same sentence needs to state the writer's opinion or position on that topic. We want to make sure that our thesis statement is, as the A in the acronym stands for, arguable, and we can't necessarily argue a fact. So we need to make sure, like that third bullet point says, that the thesis statement fits on that fact-opinion continuum in the appropriate area. We need our thesis statements to be more opinion, but we don't want it to go so ridiculously far that it falls into what we call the stupid zone. Ultimately, though, this thesis statement is where you begin the I say part of your essay. This is where you are entering that conversation, while of course needing to stay in the third person for that more formal academic voice. So let's look at that fact-opinion continuum a little bit more. Basically what we're saying is that the thesis statement needs to fit on here. Where does it need to fit? Kind of where that star thing is. It can't be too far on the left and be a simple fact, and it definitely cannot be too far off the deep end to the right. Here's why it can't be a fact. There will be no need to write an essay about it. To say something like, so-and-so is president. That's a fact. We don't need to write some sort of multi-paragraph essay on that. It's done. One sentence, you're done. At the very end, the stupid zone we would call it, we can't go so far past opinion that it's something that can't be proved. or is not worthy of academic study. For example, such and such president has made such bad decisions because he's an alien. How in the world could we ever prove that? Now, is there some opinion in there? Sure, that such and such a president has made bad decisions. And it's the writer's opinion that they're doing it because of the fact that they are an alien. Okay, maybe that is your opinion, but you've gone so far past anything you can logically prove that I would argue you've entered what we just call the stupid zone. That is not provable. There is no way you could ever prove that that thesis is valid. Even if you do make some points that somebody is making bad decisions, there's no way you can prove it that they're making bad decisions because they are an alien. You can't peel back their skin and reveal some sort of green-eyed monster thing. Even if you could, Secret Service would have taken you down. We want our thesis statements to be somewhere on that continuum, somewhere between fact and opinion, without going too far. So as mentioned before, this thesis statement must be arguable. It must be something that needs and calls for debate. So we have to look at that and go, is it defendable? Is there evidence on our side? Do we have any reason to logically think what we have just put forward in our thesis statement? And then, once we've kind of figured out, yes, there is, we can be backed up by evidence. We can be backed up by facts and by charts and graphs or examples from a text. We have to ask ourselves, how will we put forth that argument? Are we going to write our paper based on logic, where we try to convince people through their brain that our thesis statement is valid? Or are we going to go ahead and look for the heart angle? Are we going to push emotion? Are we going to try and convince people based on emotion rather than logical thought that our thesis is valid, that it is a reasonable idea? The last part of a SOAP thesis statement is the idea of it being predictive. The thesis statement not only needs to state the topic and the position on that topic, but it needs to give the reader some roadmap of where the paper is going to go. Now, oftentimes, with young writers, we encourage them to write those 3 big topics they're going to use to convince people in their thesis statement. And we would call those the three-pronged thesis statement. With that said, if you are going to list your 3 big reasons as to why you think your thesis is valid, they should probably be listed in some sort of logical order. Many people argue putting your most concrete and most strong example first. Then your kind of so-so one, and then your weakest example last. Just as an aside, when you are or if you are listing your 3 big topics in your thesis statement, please make sure that if you list your topics as A, B, C, that when you do start writing your body paragraphs or body sections, that those go in that same order. So for example, if your 3 prongs to a convincing argument are cats, then dogs, then birds, your body paragraphs should follow that same order: cats, dogs, and then birds. So here's an example. Robert Frost creates an atmosphere of calmness in his poem through his use of alliteration, commas, and imagery-filled language. And this is a good thesis statement for a paper. We can see what the topic is: Robert Frost and his poetry. We can then see the writer's opinion or position on this. The writer feels that he creates an atmosphere of calmness. We can then see what the big body sections are going to be about: alliteration, commas, and then imagery-filled language. So this really hits all of the elements of a strong SOAP thesis statement, or a 3-pronged thesis statement. Example number 2, here's another example of a strong thesis statement. Again, we can see the topic: Roaring Twenties and women. We can see the writer's position on this, that the 20s changed American women because of certain elements. We can then go on to see where this paper is headed. We know that they're going to talk about 3 body chunks: flappers, then drinking, then jazz. And since we have seen that all in the thesis statement, we know that everything they're going to write about is going to prove how the 20s, through flappers, drinking, and jazz, really changed American women's lives. Here's example number 3. At this point, go ahead and stop the podcast and quiz yourself a little bit. What is their topic? What is their position? And what are the 3 big chunks that they will talk about? So this last section here asks you to look at a couple potential thesis statements that have not met all of the requirements that we have established, that they state the topic, that they state the position, and that they give predictive elements. What we'd like you to do here is stop the podcast after you've read each one and then challenge yourself a little bit. Can you rewrite these so that they do meet all of those elements? All right, so hopefully you were able to look at these thesis statement examples and realize that they were lacking something. Perhaps they were too factual, perhaps they were too opinionated, missing some of the predictive elements. Regardless, we're hoping that you're able to look at those and decide and know how those can be strengthened in terms of just general structure. Now, on this slide that we're calling Moving to the Advanced, some of you guys are doing an excellent job already writing thesis statements. Your statements truly control your essay. They state a topic, they state the opinion, and they're somewhat predictive. The reader knows where you're going. Oftentimes, people look at the three-pronged thesis statement that we just talked about and decide, that's a little too elementary for me. I don't need to have those things written on my paper to remind me to write about them. And so one way that if you feel like you really have a grasp of this down, one way that you can strengthen your paper is to write those thesis statements being predictive, but without listing your three topics. And so the whole point of having you list those is to make sure that you see them on your paper and then continually refer back to them. But if you feel like you have a good enough grasp on your topic or your writing control, and you don't want to be so explicit with the three things you're going to talk about, go ahead and try it. Try to eliminate those three prongs from the thesis statement. Just give us a statement that states the topic and states the opinion and does hint at where you're going, and see how that paper becomes a little bit more subtle. The other thing to think about, and this is just kind of a sentence fluency level thing that you could think about, is try to make sure that your thesis statement isn't just a simple sentence, meaning subject, verb, and then objects. Try toying with a dependent clause at the beginning. By doing this, by creating a dependent clause at the beginning of your sentence, then going into your main clause, that is creating a complex sentence. And it oftentimes just offers a nice variety to the rest of the sentences in the paragraph. Oftentimes we get so hooked on the pattern of A, B, C, subject, verb, object. It gets boring to read. The pace is too fast. So perhaps you can toy with that pace by adding in a complex sentence where you have the dependent clause first and then move yourself into your independent clause or the main part of your sentence. Just toy with the pacing a little bit, toy with the word order, and see what that does to the overall complexity of your thesis statement. As always, when you come in tomorrow to class, please make sure you have your notes and any questions you might have. We'll go forward from there to creating the rest of our essay. Thanks a lot as always. If you have any questions, bring them in. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow.